Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're a founder, a CTO, or a business executive, you already know the sky-high stakes of software development. Every single year, just incredible amounts of capital are poured into technology partnerships. And yet, there's this really painful reality that persists across our industry. A massive chunk of these technology investments completely fail to deliver long-term business value. We're going to look closely at exactly why this happens, and more importantly, how to actually fix it. We are skipping the fluff today. We're going to establish a clear, consultative framework so you can ensure your product doesn't just launch, but actually scale successfully. Let's dive right in with a pretty profound realization. Think about this for a second. There's a real difference between a vendor who builds what you specify and a partner who questions why you specified it. Now, that difference might sound kind of subtle on paper, but in practice, it's literally the deciding factor in whether your product successfully reaches enterprise clients at Series B or just gets completely stuck in an agonizing, wildly expensive rebuild at Series A. Today, we're drawing a very sharp line between mere execution and true strategic collaboration.
Okay, here is our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Why technology partnerships fail. 2. The hidden specification problem. 3. Strategic versus transactional outsourcing. 4. 3 common failure patterns. And finally, 5. Creating long-term business value.
Let's start right at the top. Section 1. Why technology partnerships fail.
It's time to face the music. When these partnerships crash and burn, it's almost never because the actual coding was bad. It's a structural flaw. We call it the specification execution trap. Basically, most failures share one root cause. The engagement was structured as traditional outsourcing, not as a partnership. Your engineering team gets a spec and they simply build it. Sounds great, right? Wrong. Eventually, the founding team realizes that what was specified wasn't actually what the market needed. Why? Because the spec was written by people who simply didn't know what they didn't know. Handing off a spec to a vendor creates this massive blind spot. You end up with software that is technically correct but completely fails commercially.
That brings us nicely to Section 2, the hidden specification problem. We really need to unpack why relying on fixed requirements is basically a guaranteed path to delays and costly revisions. Think of a specification like a super narrow focal lens. It describes features, not outcomes. It describes interfaces, but totally misses user behavior. And sure, it maps out workflows, but it completely ignores the real-world operational constraints that are going to break those exact workflows in production. The reality is, business needs are constantly evolving. Writing a complete, totally rigid specification is practically impossible. If you're expecting a single document to capture the entire operational reality of your business, you're already falling behind. So, the takeaway here is absolutely crucial. A team that builds exactly what your spec says, without ever pushing back or contributing to what it should say, that's just an execution vendor. The companies experiencing the highest growth are the ones whose partners actively contribute to the product definition, not just the delivery. These are two completely divergent paths. True partners actually help shape the product for high-growth success, rather than just blindly following a linear execution path. All right, moving to Section 3, strategic versus transactional outsourcing.
We need a major paradigm shift here. Let's break this shift down across 4 key dimensions. First up, contribution scope. A vendor just builds to spec. A partner actually helps define the product and brings in domain knowledge that you might be lacking. Second, architecture. Vendors just take whatever decisions you hand down, but partners share joint ownership to ensure you can actually scale long-term. Third, problem identification. This is a big one. Vendors only flag issues when they literally stop the work. Partners, they spot those blockers before Sprint 1 even kicks off. And finally, value creation. Vendors deliver exactly what you asked for. Partners actively hunt down ways to create disproportionate user value. Long-term planning, shared responsibility, continuous collaboration, these are the true drivers of innovation.
Let's look at the actual damage this causes. Section 4. 3 common failure patterns.
There are 3 distinct failure patterns that conventional outsourcing consistently produces. You've got specification incompleteness failure, architecture debt failure, and innovation gap failure. Now, that third one, innovation gap, that happens when a vendor just builds what you know today, completely missing all the new technological capabilities or market patterns a strategic partner would naturally bring to the table. But let's dive deep into the very real, massive business impacts of those first 2 patterns.
The first major trap is specification incompleteness. Look, your spec might explicitly state what the product should do, but it is almost certainly missing the complex operational conditions it has to run under. We're talking enterprise integration needs or, hidden regulatory rules. A transactional team, they'll just build to the spec and happily ignore those gaps. But a strategic partner is going to raise those risks immediately before Sprint 1 begins. Because when those edge pieces of the puzzle, like unstated enterprise regulations, are missing, communication gaps explode and your product simply fails to deploy.
Let's anchor this to the bottom line with a very real number, $100,000. Think about healthcare and HIPAA compliance for a second. If a strategic partner builds HIPAA compliance right into Sprint 1, it costs basically the same as equivalent development without it. But if an execution vendor just builds your basic spec and you have to retrofit that compliance onto a live production system later, that remediation is going to run you up to $100,000 and delay your enterprise rollout by 3 to 6 months.
And that naturally feeds right into our second trap, architecture debt failure. A purely transactional team is going to build your MVP using the absolute most direct, short-term route possible. It's an early shortcut that guarantees a massive roadblock down the line. It creates a nightmare of maintenance challenges and essentially locks you out of future innovation. A strategic partner does the exact opposite. They build a foundation that allows your future Series A features to just be simple architectural extensions rather than agonizing ground-up rebuilds.
The disparity here is just staggering. Listen to this. The difference between a data model designed for 5,000 users and one designed for 500,000 users is often just 2 or 3 extra days of design work in Sprint 1. But if your vendor skips that step, redesigning that exact same data model when you're hitting a $50 million run rate will cost you 3 to 6 months of total business disruption. That is an operational standstill that you literally cannot afford.
Okay, Section 5, creating long-term business value.
We've seen the pitfalls, so let's shift to the solution. How do strategic partnerships actually build defensible moats around your business? Well, they cross-pollinate domain knowledge to build 4 foundational pillars of competitive advantage. First, regulatory moats. Having early compliance architecture makes it unbelievably expensive for latecomers to copy you. Second, data advantages. Designing architectures specifically for machine learning from day one. Third, integration depth. When you build deep, bulletproof ties with enterprise systems, you create massive switching costs for your clients. And fourth, operational technology. Literally embedding your tech straight into customer workflows. Late entrants cannot easily replicate these fortresses.
So the million-dollar question, how do you actually make sure you're hiring a true partner and not just another vendor? You need a rigorous evaluation framework. First, demand that they walk you through their production architecture logic. Don't just accept a list of capabilities. Second, ask them to name compliance requirements in your domain that you haven't even specified yet. Test their foresight. Third, absolutely require concrete examples of a time they pushed back on a client's flawed spec. And fourth, inspect their sprint reviews. Demand to see live working software and test coverage metrics. No more settling for just pretty status reports.
Let's summarize our core lessons for today. You absolutely must treat technology partnerships as long-term strategic investments, not just a procurement exercise. You have to demand partners who will friction test, challenge, and ultimately enhance your specifications. Escaping the trap of transactional outsourcing and stepping into shared architectural ownership is, quite frankly, the only reliable way to build software that is scalable, secure, and commercially successful. I want to leave you with a provocative thought. Take a hard look at your current setup and ask yourself, are you hiring an execution vendor or a strategic technology partner? Because that answer, it determines the entire future of your product. I highly encourage you to go read the full source article for some incredible deep dive insights into these models and frameworks. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and whatever you do, keep building strategically.